in Pittsburgh at Kresge Theater in the College of Fine Arts of Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Stephen Schlossman, Professor of History and Policy at Carnegie Mellon.
And I'm Michal Friedman, the Jack Buncher Professor of Jewish Studies at Carnegie Mellon. Welcome to tonight's special musical performance by the Clarion Quartet, all members of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, whose unique mission is to bring alive, sometimes for the first time ever in public performance, the suppressed music of superb but forgotten Jewish composers of the Nazi era. Our concert is entitled simply Pittsburgh Remembers.
Today is October 25th, 2020, 2 days before the second anniversary of one of the great tragedies in modern American and Jewish life, the massacre at Tree of Life Synagogue. Our goal tonight is less to grieve than to reflect, commemorate, and honor the victims and survivors of that tragedy. And our means of doing so is to connect all of us, musically and spiritually, Jews and non-Jews alike, in an act of public historical remembrance with those who lost their lives to bigotry and hatred in Nazi Germany, and those who lost their lives at Tree of Life.
We invite you now, prior to the start of our concert, to listen to the brief, thoughtful reflections of Maestro Manfred Honeck, music director of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of Tree of Life Synagogue, and representatives of the two other congregations that lost members in the massacre, Dor Hadash and New Light Congregation, on why great music today, as in the past, serves so well to join generations together, both to remember and to heal.
And we invite you also to join us after the concert for a more extended discussion of the incredible music you have heard with members of the Clarion Quartet, led by Professor Friedman and Robert Elias, president of the OREL Foundation in Los Angeles, an organization devoted to disseminating this previously suppressed music to audiences around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rabbi Doris Dayan.
And I'm Dean Root. And we're members of Congregation Dor Hadash, which is one of the three congregations in the Tree of Life Synagogue building that was attacked on the 27th of October in 2018. And we'd like to welcome you to this concert and to think a little bit, to share a little bit with you about where we are personally and where the congregation is at this point, and how music is helping us to respond.
This second year has really been one of growth for us, but also one of reflection, because as the time between the original shooting and our present day gets longer and longer, our thoughts and feelings change as the distance in time grows.
We as members of the congregation, and I think the congregation as a whole, have reaffirmed our commitment even more strongly to the principles, to the values of what we see as Reconstructionist Judaism. We're affiliated with the movement called Reconstructing Judaism, based on Mordecai Kaplan's ideas about egalitarianism, about Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. And so we are firmly committed toward rebuilding a world, tikkun olam, in which everyone has an ability to express themselves. There is no power play against certain groups of people simply because of their religious background or the color of their skin or anything else. And that this is an egalitarian, open congregation and society in which we all feel able to pursue ourselves, our own dreams, but those for the wider world as well. And part of that is through the arts and through the intellect.
It's also the Reconstructing Judaism movement is also one that really emphasizes the idea of Jewish people in a democratic society. And I just want to be sure that we we recognize that because that was also an ideal of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, that this would be a way of approaching Judaism and a way of being Jewish that really upheld the democratic ideals of this country.
One of the ways in which music has, I think, had a profound effect on me personally over these years is that we were about to sit down and daven together through music, singing the prayers, singing the morning blessings, singing the prayers, chanting together, and sharing our voices. I know that those of our members who were physically injured or whom we lost were always talking about the way in which the sound of our voices brought us together in such a rich way, and that we were sharing our feelings around Torah, around the teachings, through the sharing of our own voices. And, they say that the violin, the string instruments, the violin family, are the most voice-like of all the instruments. They are, in fact, when you have a quartet, it's four voices singing together, singing melodic lines that interweave, that converse with one another, that are studying together, if you will, or praying together, or sharing ideas that stimulate our own thought around who we are and how we respond to the world.
And of course, also, especially the music of a very small group, such as a quartet or a quintet of very few instruments, those instruments are actually talking to each other through music. And that's so much of what our prayer life has also been, especially in Dor Hadash. It's a congregation that really loves to sing, and people love to lead prayers through song and try different melodies and sing harmony with each other. So it really is an interactive form of prayer that is very much based in musical activity. Mm-hmm.
Right. So while the congregation undertakes many different kinds of activities, one of the cores, when we all come back together again, is we're all sharing our voices. Now, this has been particularly hard for us to do under the COVID protocols because we're all on a Zoom call, and Zoom only responds to one voice at a time, unless you're there in the space together, and then it'll take up all of those voices at the same time. And this has been one of the most difficult times for us as a congregation and for the individuals within the congregation, that we can't hear each other's voices in the space at the same time. So how wonderful it is to be able to hear the multiple voices of a musical ensemble on an occasion like this, who are sharing those voices from across the decades. They're sharing music that was conceived decades and decades ago, and that, if they don't sing those prayers, we won't get to hear them again. So we are very grateful that they're able to do that for us today. One of the, I think, most moving developments of the late 20th century with regard to the Holocaust was the discovery of many music manuscripts that had been written down by people who were held captive at these concentration camps, but were still creating art. We're still celebrating the world through sound and through idea in music. And it's so marvelous that the Clarion Quartet is performing some of this music and is really helping to inform the world about the beauty, the true vitality of the lives of the people who are creating as composers and as musicians during that time.
People who were essentially affirming life even in a place of death. That it was so important to them to do that. That's the particular thing that really speaks to me about the music that the Clarion Quartet will be playing.
And that music is the bits that I've heard, and I've heard several performances now by the Clarion Quartet. That music is sometimes challenging for us to hear. It's a little surprising sometimes. It doesn't fit some sort of preconceived notion we have about memory, in which we are casting ourselves back and imagining what life might have been like. They were responding in their own reality at that time. And it's a very personal, very sometimes quite surprising sound that they were creating.
I think it's important too to realize that one of the connections between music that was created in a place of extreme suffering and loss, as the music from the Holocaust was, and our responses now to that music, and also to our own making of music during a time that is a time of reflection of suffering for us, is really important. It's that's emotional, spiritual connection that makes their music literally live again, and the people who created that music live again in our own time.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Cohen. I am co-president of New Light Congregation, one of the 3 congregations affected by the worst anti-Semitic act of violence in the history of the United States. This Tuesday, on October 27th, we commemorate the 11 innocent lives lost, including 3 from our congregation: Richard Gottfried, Daniel Stein, and Melvin Wax. These men were our religious leaders. These men, under the leadership of Rabbi Jonathan Perlman, led our services, populated our choir, and managed our events. These men were the beating heart of our community of ritual. We mourn their loss every day. It is a custom to visit the graves of our loved ones each year. This commemorative season, we are dedicating, as a congregation, physical monuments to those we have lost. On the 18th of Heshvan, November 5th, and the following weekend, our members will gather together in person and on Zoom to remember, to reflect, and to honor the memory of Richard Gottfried, Daniel Stein, and Melvin Wax, with the dedication of a memorial board in our chapel and a memorial monument at our cemetery. What happened to New Light Congregation, Congregation Dor Hadash, and Tree of Life OREL Simcha pales before the losses of the Holocaust. Tonight, we are going to hear about a group of men and women who continue to toil at their craft while facing certain death. Their music is a testament that the good we do during our lives can live long afterwards, enriching the fabric of our existence. We are honored that this concert is dedicated to those we lost. Thank you.
I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you who are gathered here today to hear a special concert. I'm very sorry that I cannot be present in person. How I would have loved to hear this concert. I was in Europe when I received the news of the horrific attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. It was like a shock because I had never in my life imagined that something like this could happen in one of the friendliest cities in America. My heart was and still is with the victims of this atrocity. After some time, I asked myself if and what the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra and I could do to help the community to heal. What followed became one of the most impressive emotional performances in my career. It was very powerful. The evening began with a personal prayer before the concert in the conductor's suite with our Jewish friends. Then, in the hall, Rabbi Myers led a most memorable prayer. The evening continued with the thoughts of the speakers, selected music, and foremost the remembrance of the names of the deceased together with children holding candles. Itzhak Perlman honored us with his presence. Perhaps the most touching moment for me was when I saw many people in the audience at the end holding hands and with tears in their eyes. I also felt at that moment how precious it is that in such tragic moments we can unite all our strengths, and with our art we can reject all violence. And I would like to thank everyone involved once again, especially Rabbi Myers, for his willingness to celebrate this memorial service with the PSO. Music is language which can be understood by every person who is ready to listen. It does not care whether one is rich or poor. It serves all people as a healing, uniting force. Let me read a statement by Leonard Bernstein, whom I had the opportunity to meet and appreciate personally as an orchestral musician in Vienna. This is an excerpt from a speech he gave at the Curtis Music Institute on the occasion of the 50th anniversary in February 1975. He said, "What have we artists to do with oil and economy, survival and honor? The answer is everything. Our truth, if it is heartfelt, and the beauty we produced out of it, may perhaps be the only real guidelines left, the only clear beacons, the only source of renewal of vitality in the various cultures of our world. Where economists squabble, we can be clear. Where politicians play diplomatic games, we can move hearts and minds. Where the greedy grab, we can give. Our pens, voices, paintbrushes, badedeurs, our words, our C-sharps and B-flats can shoot up higher than any oil well, can break down self-interest, can reinforce us against moral deterioration. Perhaps after all, it is only the artist who can reconcile the mystic with the rational, and who can continue to reveal the presence of God in the minds of man. Music must also act as a reminder for the future. Music in wartime signals an agenda to dare a new life together. It reminds us of what war destroys and peace offers. The resistance of music to appropriation in the event of war, its seemingly abstract irrelevance, proves to be its saving grace. Thus, music is the human expression which might be the most likely to survive all efforts of oppression and censorship. Music offers those who write, play, or imagine it a freedom of expression that it is difficult to take away. Among the most poignant examples is the Messiaen Quartet of the End of Time, written while the composer was a prisoner of war in conditions of hardship. This masterpiece once again suggests that music cannot easily be corrupted by the goals of conflict, violence, and war. It can remind us of the best in humanity, maintain our sense of hope, and preserve our dignity against the worst of adversity. Music can also humble our arrogance. By retaining its power to communicate across political differences, it reminds us of the appropriate limits of beliefs about right and wrong, which become more rigid in times of war. In this sense, listening to music in wartime points us to the state of life we would most desire, a state of freedom and peace in which the power of imagination, in the service of the experience of beauty, can flourish among all peoples. Music keeps the thread of hope alive and reminds us of what we might have forgotten within ourselves. I see it as a place between borders, between cultures, between disciplines, between generations. Culture builds bridges. Music, and with it all art, can build cultures of non-violence and imagine an integrative future. And culture, as the way we express ourselves and understand each other, is an essential part of building a stronger society. I think it is extremely important to remember the victims of oppression. To this end, there cannot be done enough. I thank all those who have worked for the success of this evening. I myself will conduct a concert in Berlin in May 2022 and have decided to perform a work by the composer Hans Krager, who was also deported to Theresienstadt in memory of the end of World War II. I will also premiere at my festival in Wolfegg in Germany a new work by Florian Franek with the title The 7 Last Letters, which is about the last letters written by prisoners to their relatives before they were murdered by the Nazis. I now wish you a wonderful evening. Enjoy the Clarion Quartet's art of playing and all the important and stimulating conversations you will have. I am sure that you will remember it for a very long time.
Shalom, I am Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of the Tree of Life. Some of you might not know that in addition to being an ordained rabbi, I am an ordained cantor as well. Music has always been part of my life, harking back to learning to play the clarinet in 4th grade, singing as a boy soprano in my synagogue choir, being taught how to read Torah and chant Haftarah by my cantor of blessed memory, to becoming the choir director at the young age of 15 when he had a stroke. All music flows in my veins, but especially Jewish music. I've been privileged to have a vast range of musical experiences throughout my life that impacted me greatly. I attended Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concerts with the New York Philharmonic in person. As a New Yorker, I have seen many Broadway shows and operas. I have sung in and conducted numerous choirs. I recall one moment of a rehearsal with a group of cantors when, at the conclusion of the piece, there was this otherworldly silence, and the conductor merely said, "Wow, we had just experienced something incredible." It was with trepidation that I accepted the honor of participating in the concert that Maestro Hanuck and the Pittsburgh Symphony quickly put together to commemorate the conclusion of the 30-day period of mourning. While my role was quite simple, to lead all assembled in the recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish, I was still traumatized from October 27th, mixed with a wide range of emotions, still trying to process what had happened. I was familiar with the beautiful repertoire that had been chosen, but did not know how I might react to any of it. The maestro and the entire staff of the Pittsburgh Symphony were so warm, sensitive, and welcoming that afternoon as I arrived for the rehearsal. We gathered in the maestro's chambers prior to the beginning of the concert as he offered a moment of prayer, which I found to be so moving. We then dispersed to take our assigned seats. At the appropriate choice of Ravel's Kaddish, I then ascended the side podium, asked all in attendance to rise, and in a moment that might have been a first for Heinz Hall, everyone present who knew the text recited the words of the Mourner's Kaddish, an unusual statement that praises God without ever mentioning death at all. It was a sort of eerie moment leading everyone in the Mourner's Kaddish, as this was not a formal or even informal prayer service. I thought that its addition at this place in the program was appropriate. I returned to my seat in the rear stage left, with the other small group of participants who were offering a variety of readings. As the concert continued, I began a conversation with God. I mentioned that I had previously experienced the conclusion of the 30 days of mourning for my father and learned how to move forward. But this was different. How do I move forward from this? I asked God. God, when will my mourning cease? My questions were less rhetorical than they seem. I was truly seeking God's comfort and reassurance. I was weary and just did not know where my strength to continue might come from. The concert concluded, and I was about to say something to myself like, well, now what? When Maestro Hanek signaled a percussionist to strike the tubular bells. 1, 2, 3. They reverberated throughout the hall. Oh no, I said to myself. He's going to have him strike the tubular bells 11 times. 4, 5, 6. The tears just gushed out of me. I wanted to escape the stage, but there was nowhere to escape to. 7, 8, 9. It seemed interminable. 10, 11. As the final strike reverberated through Heinz Hall, through the tears, my eyes blurrily focused on the beautiful wallpaper on the opposite wall. They slowly climbed through the floral pattern. As they did, I turned once again to the psalm that I had been reciting since the days after October 27th, Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the hills. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from God, maker of the heavens and the earth. I cried and pleaded with God. God, when does my mourning end? Please take away my pain. It has become unbearable. My eyes continued their upward climb, as though they were enacting out the psalm itself. Through my agony, I suddenly felt this great weight slowly lift off my shoulders. For the past month, I had felt like I was carrying the entire world on my shoulders. Not just the pain of the Jewish communities of the world, but of all good people on this planet who also felt the loss so personally. The weight was just too much. Yet as I looked up to the ceiling, I could literally feel a pair of hands taking the weight off my shoulders. God had indeed answered my prayers, and I felt this warmth overtake me, as though a divine embrace enveloped me in love. I had lifted my eyes to the hills. My help came from God, maker of the heavens and the earth. I could feel the tension ease off of my shoulders, and I just said, thank you. We walked off stage, and the stage manager asked all of us to walk back out to the front of the stage to receive the applause of the appreciative audience in attendance. I was in no condition to do so, and would have rather found a quiet space to be by myself. But I sucked it up and went out first. As I approached Maestro Hanek, we embraced and kissed, and I whispered into his ear, thank you for helping me heal. When we think of the power of music, we might think of a Philharmonic Symphony, or the Clarion Quartet, or cool jazz. For me that evening, it was the cold, singular sound of a tubular bell peal that was the most powerful musical moment in my life. While it is a percussive instrument, nevertheless, it created an experience that words could not, and remains still indescribable to this day. In all my years, I could have never anticipated that the most powerful musical moment in my life would be the simple striking of the same tubular bell 11 times. That is the power of music.
so glad you've tuned in to listen to a concert of the Clarion Quartet. You have just heard a work of music that gained the Czech composer Erwin Schulhoff instant praise from critics and music lovers less than 100 years ago. A decade later, while still at the height of a brilliant and expressive career as a composer, concert pianist, and teacher, his voice was silenced. His teaching post was taken away. He was banned from performing on any concert stage, and his music was named degenerate. Entartetemusik was the term the Nazis used, imposed on his and countless other artists' works out of sheer racism. And these were musicians comparable to the likes of Leonard Bernstein, Duke Ellington, Yo-Yo Ma. Imagine those voices of today, silenced. The world of classical music relies on the traditions handed down from master to student, on the hearing and playing of works through generations. That lineage was severed, and for so many years that to this day, most musicians have not had the privilege to study the rich collection of music that suffered the same fate and is only now being rediscovered. By tuning in tonight to hear this concert, you have become an integral part of undoing the silencing, of giving all these composers the audience of music lovers their art deserves. Playing and listening to their music honors their lives and heals our world in some way. The next two selections were written by the composer Mieczysław Weinberg. Born in Warsaw, Poland in 1919, to a family of well-loved musical theater artists, he was accepted at age 20 to attend the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, with his prodigious talent as a pianist. As he prepared to come to just the other side of our state of Pennsylvania, the Nazi invasion of Warsaw shortly after ended that plan and sent him fleeing for his life east to Minsk in the Soviet territory. He was never to be reunited with his family. Many artists and musicians were exiled during the war and still, with the burden of their great loss, continued creating their works for the world, for us. Weinberg's vast output of music in his lifetime and the great respect he earned from fellow musicians, and especially his close friendship and admiration from Shostakovich, speaks to the genius of this man whose music was deemed unexportable by the Soviet regime. This is why it has taken so long for his work to start making it onto our concert stages. Once this great music is heard, though, it can no longer be silenced. The two short pieces we'll play now were written at the beginning of Weinberg's career as a composer, and just 2 years after the loss of his entire family to the Holocaust. We dedicate this part of the program to the memory of the 11 victims of the Tree of Life shooting and to healing for the survivors. As you allow the music to fill the space where words do not reach, we can also reflect on a world of systemic love, creativity, and acceptance.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we especially want to say a huge thanks to the Carnegie Mellon School of Music, Department of History, and the Jack Buncher Chair in Jewish Studies for collaborating with us on putting this evening together. It's kind of been a dream come true for us to work with other disciplines because for us, this mission, this quartet, it's not just about music, it's about something deeper that touches every part of humanity. I wanted to say a few words about how the quartet formed. We were asked to play a concert 5 years ago where we would be playing music written before, during, and after the Holocaust by suppressed composers. We looked at the list of names suggested, and we realized we probably knew maybe 2 or 3 of them on a list of 50. We'd never heard of them. The first thing that crossed my mind was, well, there's probably a reason we haven't heard of them, right? We all know what the good stuff is. We sat down and started listening, started reading through the music, and we were just blown away. The depth of the repertoire, how many different kinds of pieces, as I hope you hear tonight. The beauty of the music, invention, joy, things we'd never heard. And it became more than just a concert that we played. It started to really mean something to us. And we played that first concert, and then we wanted to do more. We realized that while we were on tour with the Pittsburgh Symphony in Europe, we were going to have a day off in Dresden, which is about 2 hours from the concentration camp of Theresienstadt in German. And we thought maybe we could take a day trip and go see the camp. One of the main reasons was because one of the pieces we were playing was by Victor Ullmann, who was interned in Theresienstadt and died. We managed to arrange to have a small concert there, just really for us and other members of the Pittsburgh Symphony who wanted to come along to have the experience with us. And we played a short concert on the stage in Theresienstadt, in the place where the piece was written before the composer died. And that piece was the third quartet of Victor Ullmann. It's one of the only pieces that he wrote that survives today. And continuing to revisit this piece time and time again for the 5 years that we've been playing as a quartet has been unbelievably rewarding. And having played it for this amount of time, it's become familiar to us the way that Beethoven quartets that we grew up with are. And so it's our hope and our mission that we can bring all of this kind of music and much more to wider audiences so that it becomes familiar and takes its place in the repertoire where it belongs.
Thank you so much. And since you couldn't be here with us tonight, we hope you leave comments in the section below the YouTube channel, and we will answer your questions and your comments. And please stay tuned for the post-concert discussion, where you'll see all of us speaking with Robert Elias from the OREL Foundation, who's doing a lot of work in this regard, and Michal Friedman from the Jewish Studies here at CMU. Thank you so much again. Good night.
Hello. I would like to thank the Clarion Quartet for a truly wonderful evening of music and to welcome everyone from near and far who is joining us for this roundtable discussion. I am also grateful to all of the institutions that have generously supported this event and to the Department of Music for making it possible for us to hold the concert. I'm Michal Friedman, the Jack Buncher Professor of Jewish Studies at Carnegie Mellon University, and it gives me great pleasure to be joined by all 4 members of the Clarion Quartet. We're also honored tonight to have Robert Elias, president of the OREL Foundation, join us from Los Angeles. The OREL Foundation, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with it, is dedicated to recovering the musical heritage suppressed by the Third Reich. I would like to open by talking briefly about the experience of organizing this concert in collaboration with the Clarion Quartet, various community members from the synagogues who suffered losses on October 27th of 2018, as well as with my colleagues in the Department of History at Carnegie Mellon. As a professor of Jewish history who lives and teaches only blocks away from the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Squirrel Hill, in a city and neighborhood that moreover pride themselves on a historically rich sense of community and a culture of tolerance and diversity, organizing this concert in this particular time of COVID-19, of witnessing our democracy in peril and the proliferation of hatred and racism, I can say it certainly felt as if I were engaged in the labor of remembering the events and by taking action. The urgency I and my colleagues felt to not wait until we had more time to prepare or when conditions might allow us to have the Clarion Quartet play to a full concert hall was palpable. Moreover, in speaking with the various community members from the 3 congregations that were affected by the massacre, some of whom I had the privilege of recording for our pre-concert program, I was struck by how central a role music played in the lives of these particular congregations and in the lives of those individuals who were lost. This connection to music, and music as a way of life, as an integral part of Jewish ritual, and as a form of reflection and healing, made clear that the decision to remember such a difficult event through music resonated with many here in Pittsburgh. I now turn to Jewish history, my area of expertise after all, to offer a few thoughts. The topic of the connections between music and memory are central to the study of the Jewish past, and certainly to music written during the Holocaust era. What is the relationship between music and remembrance? Does musical performance constitute an active site of memory? Or is there a pure musical experience that can take place shorn of memory or historical context? Does the meaning of the music need to be precisely keyed to its context when dealing with a fraught past such as the Holocaust? Or might we let it speak in a multiplicity of ways that does not privilege the historical context in how we receive the music, and allowing for radically different ways of understanding and receiving music? Finally, by illuminating a certain repertoire of forgotten music, are we inadvertently marginalizing other musical heritages from the same period? With these thoughts, I would now like to turn it over to Bob Elias, who will further illuminate some of these and other issues and engage the quartet in conversation about their own experiences of playing this music. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michal, and it is an honor to be with you all virtually this evening for this commemorative event. It is also an added particular to be with Tatjana of the Clarion Quartet, along with her three quartet colleagues who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago now in Pittsburgh, and whose work in the performance and advocacy of composers whose lives were interrupted or much worse during the years of the Nazi regime in Europe is so important. I work very closely in the OREL Foundation with the founder of the organization, who founded the OREL Foundation 13, 14 years ago with the assistance of Professor Michael Beckerman of New York University. And he likes to say that the work of performing composers who were suppressed during these Nazi years in Europe is a matter of not simply occasionally playing one of the pieces, but rather repeated, excellent, committed performances. And that appears to be very much at the center of the Clarion Quartet's work in this regard. So a tip of the hat to all of you for your wonderful work in this area. The OREL Foundation focuses on this music, and very often music that was, as a result, written in fraught circumstances, whether they were written in concentration camps or under Nazi oppression or under the difficulties of work in exile, for a creative voice to be removed from the personal, artistic, cultural milieu and then transplanted into strange soil in other countries is another challenge that was faced by so many of the composers that we advocate. The Clarion's program this evening visits various aspects of this work. You have the work by Erwin Schulhoff that was written in the 1920s, long before the Nazi regime took over. You have works, the two charming shorter works, charming and also filled with depth works by Mstislav Weinberg, that was written in exile in Tashkent in the middle of the war. And then, of course, Victor Ullmann's very powerful string quartet number 3 that was written in the Theresienstadt ghetto concentration camp. So in this program, we heard representative pieces of these 3 qualities of music during the Nazi years in Europe. Schulhoff, of course, is connected because he died in a concentration camp. But again, when he wrote the 5 pieces, there is no indication in those pieces of what was to come, musically, philosophically, in any particular way. Yet we group him very often in concerts of commemoration because of how he came to an end, which is very much a part of the story. And so I thought we would discuss today how one approaches, among other things, how one approaches music written in fraught circumstances, how we receive music in such moving, commemorative, and what does the music say to musicians in particular, as well as audiences, when so often the music performances are wrapped within the unfortunate bubble of the circumstances of their writing and the fate of so many of the composers. I'd like to just wrap up my introductory thoughts with two metaphors that I like to use. One cannot discuss this repertoire and these composers without an appreciation for the heavy, dark planet gravity of the Holocaust, nor should we necessarily. But live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is, of course, the home of Hollywood and movies. And what I like to think of is, in terms of a movie experience, when we are watching a film, we're aware of the cinematographer's art, where there are different depths of field. You will have someone in the foreground, and you will have something that's often slightly out of focus in the background. Or you could have something in focus in the background and kind of fuzzy in the front. My goal in approaching this music is to not reduce the impact of the Holocaust in the discussion of this music, but to slightly shift the depth of field so that the music is in the foreground and the Holocaust is in the background. It cannot be avoided, it should not be avoided, but I think it's important that we approach the repertoire first from the musical. And then from a historical point of view, there's a wonderful quote by Christopher Haley, wonderful musicologist, who in introductory words to a book he edited on the music of Alban Berg, he writes, history is texture, and texture loves a glancing light. We know so much about the giants of the 20th century in terms of music history. However, behind so many of those giants stand many of the composers that we discuss at the OREL Foundation through our work, and those composers represented by the work of the Clarion Quartet. And so I am reminded of my time in school, and I remember the typical music history survey course, music before 1750 and then music after 1750 over 1 year. I went to school quite a bit longer ago than the rest of our musicians here, but I just remember dealing with the 20th century. The professor who taught this particular course, music after 1750, was particularly enamored, as we all are, with the music of Mozart. And I remember in the spring semester sitting in a rather warm room in Whitney Hall on the campus of University of Southern California, and listening to yet another lecture on the operas of Mozart in this survey course, and realizing the weather was getting very warm outside, and we still hadn't broken through the into the 1800s. But when we did, we tended to rush through the music of the 20th century. And in my work with the OREL Foundation, I typically ask musicians what their experience was of the first half of the 20th century in their music history courses. And I remember mine, which was, we talked about the late 19th century Of course, Wagner, the giant figure of the era, and in the Austro-German tradition, then Mahler and Bruckner, and then the upsetting work of Schoenberg and the Second Viennese School. And then we almost immediately hung a very hard left and went to France in our discussions and talked about the Impressionists and legacies. And then by the time we got back to the Austro-German tradition, we were now talking about the post-war musical scene in Germany and in Austria. So to get a conversation rolling, I would ask the members of the Clarion Quartet if any of you experienced in school any repertoire or music history discussion of composers with whom you're so much more familiar now, maybe, starting with Zemlinsky or Schulhoff. Do any of you recall experiences in your studies encountering the repertoire of these composers?
Not in an educational context. I remember hearing the Schulhoff piece for bass and viola and flute, and I was completely blown away. And that was, I grew up in Los Angeles and went to USC too, and so it was a similar setting, but it certainly wasn't presented in any of our history courses, any of our theory courses, any of our performance courses where we just, where we talked about artists from the past. And my emotional reaction to getting to know that music was, I felt a little cheated by my education. And I felt that I had trusted that I was getting to know all of the music that was worth knowing. And I believed in that blindly. And getting to know that there was this huge amount of repertoire that was hidden and unknown to me, it was exciting, and also made me rethink a lot of things that I take for granted about our field, our world, and has changed the way that I think about my assumptions about what's out there and what I think I know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that when I found out about this music, it felt like we're opening a whole new door in the music library. Just really all of this exists, and it's been there the whole time. And there are these composers that we've never heard of. Well, I played this Schulhoff piece that you mentioned, Bronwyn, and that was my first taste of Schulhoff. I thought, wow, how inventive, how wonderful. So I was excited to look into his music, but I didn't know that Korngold had been such a genius writer and was writing serious music other than the movie music that we knew about. I didn't know about Victor Ullmann, not heard about Mstislav Weinberg. All these amazing composers. I do feel cheated, like Bronwyn said. I wish I'd known this. When I was looking into the Shostakovich quartets, there was a time in my youth when I discovered Shostakovich for myself, listened to everything. I just couldn't get enough. Well, Shostakovich was writing right alongside Weinberg this whole time. And had I known Weinberg's quartets, I would have been doing the same thing. And that would have been enriching me as a musician. And all of these things were just silenced and continued being silenced by the fact that usually history goes down from teacher to student, to the next student, to the next performer. Well, those lines were cut because for years, those players and composers, teachers lost their positions. They were not able to be performing. They were really just silenced in such a big way that it's taken generations until those voices are being uncovered again, especially by people like you, Bob, and the work that you're doing. And I'm just so honored to be part of that, because to start, these were human beings, musicians with passion for what they were doing, the same as we are, and stopped in their careers. Their voices were silenced it gives us personal hurt that happened. And we want to, it just gives us all kinds of purpose to make sure that those voices are heard and as loudly as they should be at this point, just for the pure genius that they were.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, I remember when Tatjana asked me to play this first concert that we all played together, and of course I was so excited to, but then I asked what are the pieces, and she starts saying Korngold Quartet and Schulhoff and Ullmann, and I went like, wow, not a single piece do I know, and some composers I didn't even know. Of course we know Korngold because his famous violin concerto, and as Tatjana said, movie music, but it was just shocking to me. So I remember coming home and Googling this and that, trying to find these pieces and what these composers are about. And I went to Juilliard and I was there for my undergrad and master's degree, but I don't remember studying about those composers and these pieces. I mean, every time I think of Ullmann String Quartet, especially now having to have learned it and visiting Theresienstadt, I mean, I get goosebumps every time. Of course, from the experiences we've had now with this piece, but it's such incredible music that people need to know and need to learn these pieces because they're just as great as when we study Beethoven, Mozart. So it's very interesting. It was definitely and very eye-opening for me, for sure.
And ear-opening, I would imagine, as well. Jenny, did you have experience with the repertoire?
Well, it's kind of a long time ago for me too. And I can't be 100% certain that my music history teachers didn't cover a little bit of Zemlinsky because I might not have been paying attention. However, the upshot of it is that, most of the bulk of the repertoire is hidden, is like unknown to us as musicians. And I think that we live in a time and in a country where we're very fortunate to be able to find this music and to rehearse it and to perform it, to have the desire, the four of us, that's why we stayed together as a group, and then just add hard work and perseverance, and boom, it's like we're very lucky that music exists at all, and that we can find it and explore it together. I also think it's interesting to play something that none of us know very well, like maybe not at all or not very much, because we shape it and it's like we can make it our own, and that's inspirational for us as musicians to explore, be explorers, and add our expertise based on other things that we've played and know, the standard repertoire, and bring our technique of rehearsing chamber music to something new to us rather. It's exciting.
It's been a wonderful thing too, that fact that we're all from the Pittsburgh Symphony. We have so much support from our organization from the very beginning, and our fellow musicians, Maestro Honeck, who's supported us greatly from the start, and our management. So it feels like we've also spread the word. We have colleagues who tell us all the time of composers that they've heard of or things that they've heard in the news about this and this coming forward and shining light. So they know us as those musicians who are doing this work. And in that way, the word is also spreading through the musicians, and they're becoming more aware and putting out the word to their students, etc. So it feels nice that, this seed is spreading as well. And that's what it'll take, just so many more musicians and music lovers and presenters to get on board and look into this history and bring out those gems that we're trying to be playing and put back onto the concert stage where it just belongs right next to Mozart and Beethoven. And we've done some concerts where we've played it, a piece by Weinberg sandwiched in with Beethoven and Mendelssohn, for example, who was suppressed for a while as well, just for now he's well known. But this is how composers become well known, as musicians play, and it goes onto the concert stage and is played just like any other brilliant piece.
Wonderfully stated, all of you. Yeah, I came very late to this repertoire myself through my dear friend and colleague James Conlon, who has promoting and performing the repertoire for about 30 years now. And from him, I've learned so much, not just about the music, but about the challenges of presenting the repertoire in concert. And the challenges of dealing with presenting unknown names, unknown composers in an era that grows more and more sensitive to the importance of selling tickets and audience recognition. Setting aside completely, of course, our current moment where the challenges are infinitely greater. But generally speaking, that there are such challenges to not convincing anyone who hears the music that the music is certainly worth hearing. It is getting them into the hall in the first place if there's an unfamiliar name. Or in some cases, as I think we're all aware, even when there is a familiar name, but that name is Arnold Schoenberg. Right. It's a difficult thing to draw audiences in. But I would like to pose a sort of a side door question. As a result of what the quartet does, what you do in the community and elsewhere, you are performing this repertoire in concerts that emphasize the story of what happened to these composers. You are mixing in the repertoire, just said, with other, let's call them standard composers, well established in the repertoire. And then you also perform this repertoire as you have for this evening's event, in events that are commemorative and honoring the lives of those who were lost, not only in this particular case during the Holocaust years, but also more closer to home in the Tree of Life tragedy. As musicians, let me ask you, do you approach a performance of a particular work differently in those environments? Or do you simply go to the place you've determined in your rehearsals and play the piece? Is there a different approach that comes when dealing with different audiences in this repertoire? Jenny, you're wanting to say something.
I would say that when we rehearse, we don't make any kind of special, it doesn't, you lose the sight of the meaning or the context, and you just rehearse the music. I feel like we rehearse in the same way that we would rehearse anything. But depending on who's listening and the performance, some of that emotion can supercharge a performance. For sure. And, seeing the emotions of the people after the Tree of Life in Heinz Hall, this is something I'll never forget. It was beautiful. It was heart-wrenching and unifying. And I think that music is so, it's what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't have an opinion. It's just the beauty itself. It's not taking sides. It's like a balm on a sore, and it can really heal and help the healing begin. And in this anniversary 2 years later, I feel like it's very meaningful to sit down and to focus on the music.
Another thing that comes to my mind, and I completely echo Jen's comments, but is the fact that outside of the practice room, music doesn't happen in a vacuum. You play it and it's heard, and the fact that it's heard changes how you play it. So that I always feel that the audience, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's my parents in a living room or a concert hall, they are part of the performance. It affects me emotionally, and so you can never remove that aspect of the concert experience. And I truly mean it, that it is the same when it's occurring in a virtual medium, because we're still connecting and communicating, and it makes a difference. So I think absolutely the feelings of the people around you affect the performance.
I agree with the statements of my colleagues. Do you see why I love playing with these ladies so much? There's so much dedication to what we're doing, and we play as a group, as almost like we're gifting the music to our audience. We do make our audience part of the experience. Virtually, we're thinking about our audience anywhere that they may be listening to it. And not only does this music touch people because it is great music, we're playing it in a way, hopefully, that it's doing that. We want to embrace our audience and say, this was for you, this was written for you, or just carriers of this gift. You know, they left something for the world. They didn't just go and, because of their circumstances and their silenced oppression and everything that might have been happening to them, they didn't go and hide and, you know, woe is me. They continued creating. And isn't it our job to be listening, to be playing, to give voice to that? So that's what we feel like we're doing for them, because they were brave enough and creative and passionate enough to leave something for us like that. And the fact that we can take, for example, the aria, this beautiful piece of Weinberg, and play it at an event like the Interfaith event that happened, it was so beautiful that, you know, it makes us grateful. We have this music. Otherwise, I mean, we're musicians. We can make whatever sounds on our instruments, but we need that music to come through the instruments, you know, so there's a gratefulness in doing this.
And one more thing I want to add to your question, Bob, about how we approach the music. And I just want to say that I think that the whole quartet agrees on this, and this is so much a part of our philosophy. You know, we're servants of the music, and the intention of the composer, any composer, if we're going to play their music, their intention is deeply important to us. And it doesn't matter whether you're, you know, a third year student at CMU or you're Beethoven or you're Weinberg, that it's our job to honor that. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't approach it with the exact same respect for that we try to, no matter what we're playing.
Thank you. Just, you know, to stir the discussion a little bit here. How do you approach a work? How I don't mean to personalize it to the Clarion Quartet. The work like Schulhoff's 5 Pieces for String Quartet, that was written in the 20s, and yet is performed in the context this evening within the context of a commemorative memorial event. Robert, since you talk about intent, do you think Schulhoff, how do you think Schulhoff would respond to this work that he wrote in the 1920s in sort of a tribute to the Baroque suite in a jazzified form, being used in an event such as this evening's?
I guess, I haven't spoken to him about this recently, so I can't say how he would respond. But I think what I would want and what's important to me is to remember people as their most vibrant, joyous, healthy, wonderful selves. And what that makes me remember is, first of all, yes, to celebrate the wonderful things. And it mixes up your emotions, right? Because then I'm thinking how sad I am that I don't have another 5 Pieces from Schulhoff. And I don't have a cello concerto from Schulhoff. But I think that's what I would want to see is not only the funeral dirges, but to remember that when you discriminate against people for these horrible reasons, you are losing so much more. We all lose. We all lost the opportunity to have more of this. So that's what, to me, that's the value in presenting all the pre-war music, is just remembering, as Tatjana said, these are humans, these are musicians. We don't only honor their memory by mourning them, we honor them by committing to treasuring everything that humanity has to offer.
Yes, I like to remember. I think the biggest part of remembrance and the good thing about putting the hate to rest and far away is remembering life, and as vibrant as it is. And it's remembering the lives of the 11 lost with Tree of Life. It's remembering the lives of the 6 million. And whenever we have these vibrant stories to tell, it's wonderful. I like to, from his memoirs, Schulhoff wrote that he would spend all night in the dance clubs, just taking in those rhythms of the day. In the 1920s, things were happening. There was so much going on, and especially in Vienna, and the just mecca of culture. And he was taking all that in, and then he would write, and you can tell in those 5 pieces.
Oh yeah.
Love with rhythms and with changing things up and doffing form, but in a joyous way. And a critic of his said that they loved it in these 5 pieces, that he just didn't take himself that seriously like other composers. And he didn't need to make something like very clever of a piece because it was, modern and different. He was just bathing in it. And I love the idea just to see him in that club, just dancing. And that's what we want to come away from. Just look, there's music that we have. What can we do with this?
And Bronwyn, I so enjoyed your response just a moment ago about recognizing that these composers were vibrant, interesting, complicated human beings. They're, when dealing with issues of their truths, it's also important to recognize that, they were not any more perfect than anyone else. Alex Ross, in his wonderful book, And the Rest is Noise, about pretty much a classical 20th century, when talking about the totalitarian regimes in the Soviet Union, and commenting about the challenges of Shostakovich and others who were working at that time, while the political earth was shifting underneath them from one day to the next. He referred to these composers in the Soviet Union as flawed actors on a tilted stage. And that image has always stayed with me because people are people. People make mistakes. People are rounded individuals. But recognizing, them at their peaks and performing works that were written in advance of this fraught circumstances is I think so important when there are in fact works. You've now played the Ullmann third string quartet so often, getting back to Bronwyn's point. Wouldn't it be lovely if somebody were to discover the other two? Because they existed. There are reviews, the performances. He noted the string quartet he wrote in Theresienstadt as the third. So much was lost at that time. Even this evening's event, how complicated, not so much difficult, how complicated it is to hear a work in a context that adds weight to work where the weight was not intended. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that? What do you think of that?
We do feel a responsibility to honor the moment when it's tied to a memorial event, especially like this. We all want to do our part, like so many people want to do what they can. What can we do? Maybe that was the biggest question to help after the event happened, right? And we're just doing what we do as musicians and gifting that and hope that this is going to bring healing. And so with that, we present this music. But in the moment that we're playing and the moment that we're presenting or even choosing the music, I feel like the music is it. The life of these composers is it. And that's what's going to bring the healing and the uplift. And so then I stopped thinking about this as a memorial event with all the heaviness that brings with it. I tried to think about the music's power, innate power to just bring us to another world, or even just to make this world a better one.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Would I be correct in assuming that as teachers have introduced at least a couple of pieces by some of these composers to your own students?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things that we can because we're kind of experts now. It's like sort of. But yeah, I have actually assigned some pieces to my students, and I love working on it with them because they can't find a recording, or I don't let them listen to our recording, and so it's a beautiful thing to introduce that language that I would not feel right if I wasn't exploring more of this music. I like to be a well-rounded musician, like you were saying, Bob, about not really learning much about the 20th century music, like just speeding through it in like half a class. I feel that now that I know this exists, I want to familiarize myself with the language as much as I can, because it's only going to help everything else, put everything else in context.
But you're also teachers, and you are carriers of the tradition. And one of the reasons that this repertoire fell out of circulation and wasn't able to gain the traction of other works by less unfortunate composers in the 20th century is that the chain was broken of teacher to student. The traditional approach to passing on the legacy. I mean, a conservatory by its own definition conserves the tradition and passes it down. And so what was disrupted and destroyed from 1933 to 45 was that chain. It was absolutely cut, and the people who would have passed on this legacy, if they survived, if they emigrated, had no fertile soil that had already been tilled, to overwork a metaphor, for this repertoire.
Just something else from the perspective of Jewish history that I was thinking about when I was thinking about some of the conversations we've had sort of outside of this discussion today with Bob or with Tatjana, and thinking about this music, is that this act of, again, of sort of recovering these voices, reclaiming them in different contexts, whether it's in a commemorative context or other contexts, that it's a way that Jewish history is often there's been a tendency to look at Jewish history as a sort of a series of persecutions, and study, just look at how Jews died and less so than how they lived. And it's something that as historians we have to contend with, because that history, that fraught history that again, Bob, that all of us have been talking about, it's there, we can't ignore it. Nonetheless, how do we kind of sort of break that narrative and focus more on these lives, and sort of flesh out these the humanity of these people that we're writing about. So it strikes me that what you're doing through playing this music is precisely kind of an antidote to this sort of lachrymose view of and conception of Jewish history, by precisely bringing this whole repertoire back to audiences, and reintroducing it into again, to audiences, into music history, and that also, at the same time, it also helps us by sort of humanizing these composers and their music, right? Not just as again, this is a musician by sort of some prescribed narrative. This is a musician who was killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau, but that you are at the same time helping people explain the magnitude of what was lost. That this is a whole heritage, artistic heritage that was lost to us, that you're again actively restoring by this sort of the act of playing their music. So I find that it's very much in dialogue with how a lot of us as historians are thinking about sort of different acts of recovery that we're engaged in. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and it's really about the wholeness of the culture, of the people, of all of these things. And I guess what I really hope a lot of people come away with is that if you reduce a people or a culture or a group and you say, well, that's, that was a Jewish experience, you forget the fact that everyone else on this planet was affected by the loss of all of those, the art and the everything that those people contribute, and that this is not solely a Jewish loss. It's a loss to all of us. We all lost those contributions.
And Michal, if I might, very briefly to respond to what you were saying, as a historian, I'm reminded when you talk about working to to expand the narrative of the Jewish experience in Europe. I'm reminded of just a particular phrase by the historian, philosopher Walter Benjamin, who had this wonderful phrase in terms of a particular type of historicism. And he referred to this as brushing against the grain of history. And that is an approach, I think, that always brings interesting and very often fulfilling results to the investigator. Because the more one develops in this particular milieu, a relationship with the composers themselves, just as we know about Beethoven's encroaching deafness, or Mozart's problems with his father, all of these things help to enrich the experience. And clearly, all of you members of the Clarion Quartet appreciate greatly how all of this is communicated through your performances, whether consciously, unconsciously, willingly, unwillingly, it can't be helped.
Having the story about them and humanizing them opens the door to their music, and you just hope it stays open, you know.
At the same time, hearing their music opens the door to a chapter in history.
That's right.
100 years from now, when the Holocaust is as far away from us as the Civil War is to us now, art can be a gateway into a better understanding of the time of its creation.
I would love to hear this conversation just go on and on. I mean, the wonderful thing is the fact that we have this relationship with the history department and CMU who brought this forward. And I'd love to get the different perspectives of historians and those who are you know, in the art world and what happened in the art world at the time. That's all so interconnected. And the more you learn, the more you want to know. And I just hope that people listening to our concert and to our speaking go down those curious alleys.
We're very fortunate to have Tatjana as a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon, and the quartet is hopefully, I would hope, residents at the university, at the School of Music, and to continue with these collaborations, because I think it's precisely talking across sort of different disciplines or different sort of art forms that are very enriching for all of us, and certainly for audiences. And this felt very different, and I think it kind of, I would say that in some ways it's very much a watershed in the ways, not just in the history of anti-Semitism in the US, given it was the largest attack in US, anti-Semitic attack in US history, but in the ways communities respond to violence. And art and music is part of that. So, so again, thank you for what you're doing.
Well, I want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this very meaningful, important event, to have an opportunity to collaborate in this oblique virtual way with the Clarion Quartet, whose work I so very much admire, and a great pleasure to get to know you two as well, Michal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.